Sometimes being an ancient supernatural creature meant making strange choices to pay your rent. Sometimes it meant sacrificing your dignity. Sometimes it meant riding down the highway on a Greyhound bus, past a giant billboard image of yourself dressed like a Swiss milkmaid, and hiding your face so the other passengers didn't recognize you. Edelweiss Hills Dairy ads had become the bane of her long existence. Ingrid Asher never meant to be the face of an aggressively quaint dairy, headquartered in pastoral Detroit. But a decade before, an exec for the dairy's advertising agency, not headquartered in Detroit, had spotted her while working her temp job in the agency's mailroom, and the money he offered was simply too good to pass up. It was one of the few moments of serendipity she'd experienced in her long, relatively luckless life. By the time her high cheekbones, icy blue eyes, and milky complexion were discovered, she'd lived a mostly Spartan existence in New York City for close to 50 years. And at one point, she'd been close to burning the tiny sapling that gave her eternal life and walking into Central Park to die. And then she'd discovered something that made life worth living: ice cream. She'd been living in a forest, and then a fourth-story walk-up in Queens, for the last 500 years. There was no Baskin-Robbins in the deep northern forests of Norway. Once she'd discovered the healing power of frozen, sweetened delights, she'd made it her single focus to learn everything she could about ice cream. The science of how it was made, the way varying milk fats affected the texture, the various flavor combinations that tickled her palate. She bought a dozen different ice cream machines to try out techniques and recipes at home. She'd eaten sundaes at nearly every ice cream parlor in the 5 boroughs, and she'd never gained an ounce, because that was one advantage to being a tree nymph. Once you were fully grown, you stayed in that form until your death. And so she'd agreed to wrap that form in a ridiculously not accurate to any culture blue milkmaid costume, and pose in false pastures with model cows that had never worked a day in their bovine lives. The moment she saw the number of zeros on her first Edelweiss Hills check, she knew what she would do with the money: open her own creamery. She would use the best milk from happy, pampered cows to create ice cream that would soothe the soul, the way she had been pulled back from the brink by Bing Cherry Vanilla. And up until recently, she thought she would open her store in some cute, refurbished pre-war building in one of the more gentrified neighborhoods in Brooklyn. But some nagging instinct in the back of her brain, in her other nature, was calling her south. That insistent pressure had been there for years, since the day she'd set foot on American soil. But she'd been so deep in her own despair that she'd been able to ignore it. But now that she'd achieved some contentment, that call was becoming a blaring alarm, torturing her. After a little research, she'd decided to open her creamery in Mystic Bayou, Louisiana. Mystic Bayou was a bit of El Dorado to supernatural creatures, a peaceful place where they could live in the open without worrying about persecution or discovery, a supernatural utopia where shifters and fairies and other creatures lived together without the normal territorial pissing matches. She could thrive there, living among her own kind for the first time in an age. She could live without fear, without worry. She could at least live without the energy it took to hide what she was, and that would be pleasant enough. Also, it turned out that opening a business in New York was terribly expensive and prone to failure within the first year.
To keep listening to this audiobook for free, click the link in the description. It will take you to a free Audible trial where you can listen to this and many other books for free for 30 days.